A 5-day battle in the war on terror leaves us with a lot of questions. What was the motive for the marathon attack? Where did the terrorists plan to strike next with their arsenal of bombs? And how did the manhunt stop them in only a little over 100 hours? Tonight, we have the inside story from one of the leaders of that hunt, Boston Police Commissioner Ed Davis. Last Monday afternoon, Davis was in the stands at the finish line. All was going well, so he left to take a call. One of the city's favorite celebrations was coming to an end. The marathon is always on the day that marks the start of the American Revolution. But suddenly, Ed Davis and a task force of more than 4,000 would find themselves defending Boston on Patriots' Day. When you arrived, what did you see?
Something just blew up.
I saw a bombing incident that I'd only seen in places overseas. I saw Officer Michael Barrett from the Boston Police Department wade into an unbelievable scene of carnage and put the fire out on an individual that was still on fire, and then grab belts off people and put tourniquets on the man's legs so he could save his life.
This is your city. You're enormously proud of it. And these people had done this on Patriots' Day.
It certainly made me resolve to find these people quickly and to hold them accountable.
You were going to get them.
Yeah, I was.
You made that promise to yourself?
I did, and to several other people too.
Ed Davis's promise was to the 3 who were killed and more than 170 wounded. The first calls he made were to Richard Delaurier, head of the FBI's Boston office, and Colonel Timothy Albin of the state police. The FBI took the lead, and the marathon became a sprint.
Very quickly, we established a command post at the Westin Hotel in the ballroom, and that expanded from about a dozen people when I first walked in the door to 100 people in the first hour.
They found bomb parts right away. Evidence cascaded in.
It's a logistical nightmare. We found very quickly that we needed a place to process this evidence. So a warehouse was obtained very quickly. Computers were brought in from the FBI and the state police and the Boston police and set up to review video.
Among the thousands of faces, they wanted to isolate people who didn't seem surprised.
And particularly one of the FBI agents, who was a technical expert, did a tremendous job and really was the person that was able to get to the bottom of this very quickly.
Look at these people running in terror, but look deeper and see what the agent saw. This kid seems unconcerned. Turned out he came with a backpack, but he left without it, just like the older man who seemed to be with him. And when you saw the faces of those 2 men, you thought what?
I thought about the death of the 8-year-old boy, the Martin child, and how someone who didn't appear to be particularly evil could do such an evil thing.
They didn't appear all that evil to you in the video?
No, they look like college kids.
19-year-old Jahar Tsarnaev and his 26-year-old brother Tamerlan were from a region of Russia that's mostly Islamic. Their ancestors were from Chechnya, where Islamic militants have fought a vicious civil war against Russian rule. Around 2002, the family fled as refugees to the United States.
I can't give you a specific moment when I first met him. He just sort of appeared in my life.
Rose Schutzberg knew Jahar at Cambridge, Rindge, and Latin, a top high school where Jahar did well. You told us at one point that you had, in high school, a little bit of a crush on him.
Yes, I did. How could you not?
What was it about him?
I think it was that he was equally smart, but also humble and, incredibly funny. Like he was just an all-around wholesome and good person.
He fit right in. In 2012, he became a citizen, swearing the oath to protect the United States from enemies, foreign and domestic. Did he seem overtly religious to you in any way?
Not even a little bit.
Not even a little bit? These friends saw him 2 weeks ago. He was a sophomore at the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth, Ahmad Nasri and Basil Nasri, tried without luck to get him to join the MSA, the Muslim Student Association.
Did you see him at mosque? You see him at prayers? Nothing like that.
No, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
I would have loved for him to come to the MSA a few times so we can maybe understand his religion better. Maybe that would have helped in what happened, I would say.
What was he interested in?
Soccer.
Cars.
If someone a few days ago told me that one of my friends was responsible for the bombing in Boston, I would have named off at least 90% of everyone that I know before I would have said Jahar.
Tamerlan Tsarnaev did not fit in easily. A champion amateur boxer, he was disappointed that he couldn't try for the U.S. Olympic team because he wasn't a citizen. He lived with his wife and child in this Cambridge house, divided into 3 apartments. Al Aman lives there too, and he says he and Tamerlan argued 3 months ago.
He was explaining how the Bible is a cheap copy of the Quran, and how it's used for the American government as an excuse to invade other countries. And I remember he said that America's a colonial power trying to colonize the Middle East and Africa. And he also said that the most casualties in Afghanistan and Iraq are innocent bystanders gunned down by American soldiers.
Did he seem angry about all of this?
He seemed more passionate about it.
Passionate about it?
Yes, he strongly believed what he said. There was tension between both of us, but it was more of a really involved discussion.
Strong beliefs was exactly what Russian intelligence told the FBI about Tamerlan. 2 years ago, the Russians asked the FBI to look into whether he was involved in militant Islam. FBI agents interviewed Tamerlan and decided he wasn't a threat. Still, his pending application for citizenship was held up because a background check turned up that 2011 FBI investigation. The FBI is now looking into why Tamerlan returned to Russia recently for about 6 months. Last Thursday, when it released the tape, the FBI knew him only as subject number 1, with subject number 2 following in his footsteps.
It was only 5 or 6 hours after the videotape was released that events began to unfold rapidly, and there was a great deal more violence.
It's possible that these individuals activated themselves once again because they saw the pictures, because they knew that we would eventually find out who they are.
By 10:15 Thursday night, Officer Sean Collier was ambushed and murdered in his cruiser. Then, gunmen hijacked a car, which was spotted by a lone Watertown officer.
At that point, the vehicle stopped, and 2 suspects alighted from the area of the vehicle and opened fire on the officer. Very quickly, another officer, Officer Richard Donahue from the MBTA police, arrived at the scene and also engaged in the gun battle. He was shot and grievously wounded.
Loud explosion! Loud explosion! Loud explosion!
The suspects began to lob devices at the police, and the first one was a huge explosion, and then the follow-up explosions were smaller, but they were improvised hand grenades that were being thrown at the officers.
The big explosion was a bomb like the ones at the marathon. Parts of it were embedded in the patrol cars. The grenades were packed with steel pellets, just like the marathon bombs.
The gun battle continued until one of the suspects ran out of ammunition, and one of the sergeants tackled him to the ground.
A police officer ran out and tackled him, these men who had armed themselves with so many explosives.
That's correct. That's what happened. It probably would not be advised as a tactical move, but it shows the courage and commitment that officers have in attempting to get this thing under control.
He was going to put the guy down before he had a chance to reload.
Right.
And risk his own life to do it.
Right. He saw an opportunity and took it.
Tamerlan Tsarnaev was down, dying from multiple gunshot wounds.
The younger brother gets in the car, backs over his older brother, drives away. What happened then?
The suspect that fled abandoned the vehicle 4 or 5 blocks away and took off on foot. We determined that a 20-block perimeter had to be set up.
And so began the lockdown of the city of Boston.
Keep the doors locked and not open the door unless there is a uniformed, identified law enforcement officer on the other side.
The Tsarnaev apartment was raided. They found bombs inside and wondered what plans the brothers had for those. The 20-block search lasted 15 hours, and then Davis announced that they had lost the suspect.
There was extreme frustration and disappointment in the command post.
And it was not, 30 minutes later?
It was probably close to 15 minutes later
That a man called 911. He went into his backyard where he has a boat with a cover over the top, and he saw the cover was torn.
Right. He said he was dying for a cigarette. He had to go outside to have a cigarette. And he saw the blood on the boat. And so he peered in after climbing the ladder. And he told me that he saw a body in there with blood on it.
We got movement. He is moving. We have movement in the boat.
A gunshot was heard, and officers returned fire. The order was given to cease fire. We then pulled the state police helicopter in, which has a forward-looking infrared device on its nose, and it was able to come in and actually look through the plastic on the boat and see the suspect inside.
My thought when I first heard those 20 rounds was that he was already dead.
Neighbor George McMasters heard it all from his home nearby.
The thought that he'd been killed, just to me is, one more tragedy, because the last pictures I saw, he's an older face, and that's not the face I remember.
McMasters had once hired Johar as a 16-year-old lifeguard. If Johar is the bomber, McMasters has a question.
How in the world did this happen? How could he have changed so much in the year and a half that I'd been absent? Go from the young man that polite, well-spoken, friendly, engaging, typical American teenager to what I have to say is a monster.
His question is one of the mysteries. Though his friends didn't see it, we know Johar was failing in college. Something had changed. An FBI negotiator talked him out of the boat. He had been shot in the leg the night before.
Suspect in custody. Nobody is to come in the perimeter. It's still a hot scene.
They treated him for a gunshot wound through the mouth that exited the back of his neck. Whether that was a suicide attempt, Davis won't say.
Do you think he's going to pull through?
I wouldn't comment.
But the wounds are serious enough that there's a chance that he might not?
They're very serious wounds.
On Saturday at Fenway, the Red Sox honored the innocent people who were lost and wounded, and the army of 4,000 who were part of the investigation. In Boston, of course, this is a great honor. The Red Sox are the second oldest sporting institution in the city, after the Boston Marathon. The 2 explosions that tore through the Boston Marathon nearly a year ago were like a starting gun on a second race against time. Unknown terrorists were on the loose, and they had more bombs. Now, for the first time, you're going to hear the inside story from the federal investigators who ran the Manhunt. They led a task force of more than 1,000 federal agents, state police, and Boston cops. Tonight, they will speak of the disturbing evidence that cracked the case and of a debate among the investigators that ultimately led to the dragnet's violent end. The afternoon of April 15th, the FBI's man in charge of Boston got a text, 2 large explosions near the finish line. For Special Agent Rick DeLaurier, the marathon became a sprint to catch the killers before they struck again.
I felt that week that I had the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I'm sure I wasn't the only one.
Did you feel if there was a third bombing, it would be on you?
That's everybody's fear. It would be on me. It would be on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. But that wasn't what drove us. What drove us is preventing more people from getting hurt.
264 were hurt already, 3 killed. Moments before, Rick DeLaurier had been counting the days to retirement, 26 years at the FBI. Now, on Boylston Street, he took over the biggest investigation of his life.
It was a scene of devastation. There was evidence everywhere.
And you said what to yourself in that moment?
I said, we will find those responsible for these despicable crimes.
FBI Director Robert Mueller ordered every office in the world to back up Delorier. Delorier's link to headquarters was Executive Assistant Director Stephanie Douglas.
We were very, very concerned about other bombs in Boston, but we had to think beyond that. Were there other bombs in other cities? Were U.S. interests even abroad at risk? So we had to consider everything. We could not eliminate anything.
First came the crime scene. 12 blocks of debris, abandoned backpacks, and bomb parts blown to smithereens.
They set up a grid pattern. Evidence could be on windowsills. Evidence could be on roofs of buildings. Evidence could be anywhere.
Are they going down the street with tweezers?
Sometimes, when they need to, they're doing that. But yes, they're very carefully picking up everything they see.
They saw a battery pack for model cars and chunks of 2 pressure cookers. The cookers concentrate the explosion for maximum force.
You decided to set up a warehouse near Logan Airport.
Right.
Everything swept from the street was processed in this 46,000 square foot warehouse. Twice a day, a plane flew the items to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia.
And you basically have almost like an assembly line of evidence. So it gets tagged, it gets recorded as evidence so that you're preserving that chain of custody. But it also, for all the different parts and components that would later go to recreating the devices themselves.
The bombs?
Yes.
Recreating the bombs?
Yes.
From the pieces that you found?
Yes.
Successful as that was, it turned out the evidence that would solve the case had been collected before the first bomb exploded that Monday. The FBI could travel back in time through the lenses of dozens of security cameras up and down Boylston.
Almost 13,000 different videos were obtained, and 120,000, actually more than 120,000 still photographs.
At the FBI lab in Virginia, 120 analysts were searching video feeds from Boston.
What are you looking for?
Somebody who just doesn't look similar to others in a crowd who would be watching a race.
Was there a eureka moment in terms of the video? At some point somebody said, hey boss, have a look at this.
Yes, there was. It was, I believe, a Wednesday morning, and we watched that video hundreds and hundreds of times.
You can see an individual, a tall man wearing a white ball cap, walk into the frame. He has a backpack slung over one of his shoulders. He puts the backpack down very nonchalantly. He joins the crowd. You clearly see everybody look very, very definitely to the left, like they've heard something, they've seen something, so you know that first blast has gone off. He does not do that. He does not do what everybody else in that video does. He does not turn to his left. He instead just stands there for a second or two and walks very deliberately back the same direction that he came in.
The Eureka video hasn't been seen by the public. It is being kept for the trial. But this still photo shows much the same view of the suspect and the people who would be torn apart by the blast.
Let me ask you to describe what you see in that picture.
I see the subject, the individual who has been charged in the investigation, and I see people who were grievously injured in that blast, and I see individuals who died in that blast.
The people along the fence line there?
Several of them, yes. Very, very emotional time when I look at that, to know what happened a few moments afterwards.
I believe I see his backpack on the ground, and then I see one of the people that was killed as a result of that bomb.
Do you know their name?
This is Martin Richard.
Martin Richard was 8 years old. His 7-year-old sister Jane lost a leg. Their father Bill suffered hearing damage from the bomb in the backpack laid at their feet. In the video, the backpack explodes 20 seconds after the man in the white hat walks away. Stephanie Douglas saw it in the FBI's Washington Command Center.
Nobody I've talked to can quite find the words.
It's a horrible video to watch. I mean, after the bomb goes off, obviously, it's a very smoky situation. There's a lot of smoke, and the smoke clears. And what you saw is a very happy scene of people watching that marathon is no longer that. Even after seeing something so horrible, I remember the survivor who, unfortunately, his clothes were on fire. And I just remember this police officer getting down on his hands and knees and putting out the flames on this person with his bare hands. And I just thought to myself, you know, what an incredible contrast of events. Something so horrific, and then we have this person with no thought or of his own comfort or consequences to himself rush in and actually do something like that. That was so brave. I still remember that very clearly.
Only 2 days had passed. Now they were looking for every image of the suspect they called White Hat. Massachusetts State Police analysts found him with a man in a black hat.
Which turned out to be his older brother.
Yes.
Now you have the Tsarnaev brothers.
Yes.
But you don't know that.
No, I don't know that. I don't know who they are.
Then, suddenly that Wednesday, confusion reigned when cable news channels erroneously reported that a suspect had been arrested and was headed to the courthouse. The error caused pandemonium, according to U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz, who's leading the prosecution.
And I remember turning to my colleague and saying to my press person, saying, do we have someone in custody? And I turned to Rick, to Lori, do we have someone in custody? And they were like, no, we don't have anyone in custody. I think that kind of misinformation makes it appear as if government isn't in control. The investigation is sort of, you know, confusing. And so it can be very, very harmful.
More harm was done the next morning when the New York Post added to the erroneous reporting by putting a man with a white hat on its front page.
Only problem wasn't the right man in the white hat.
That generated tremendous risk and harm. It gives people a false sense of security, thinking, oh, they've identified these suspects, when it turns out that it's wrong individuals. It puts those individuals at tremendous risk.
The risk to the innocent lent urgency to the debate over whether to release the real pictures.
Why wouldn't you release the pictures to the public? Isn't that the fastest way to find the perpetrators?
Sure. But it also gives them every opportunity to escape. Remember, we do not have the identities of anybody.
So your concern was that if you put the pictures out there to the public, they'd know they'd been had and they'd run.
Yes, absolutely.
The countervailing argument is you had individuals, we had photographic evidence of individuals who we strongly believed were responsible for the bombings, and we needed to identify them as quickly as possible.
So, Thursday, Rick Delorier walked out in time for the evening news.
These images should be the only ones, and I emphasize the only ones, that the public should view to assist us.
The pictures set events in motion that Delorier didn't predict, in fact, didn't recognize, even after they started.
My wife was watching the news that evening.
An officer has been shot.
And there was a story about an MIT police officer who was subsequently identified as Officer Sean Collier, who had been murdered that evening and right on campus. My wife looked at me and she said, I bet those are your guys and they're on the run right now, and I bet they've murdered this police officer. And I didn't believe her. I said, oh, no, I don't think so. And I went to bed.
Your wife had cracked the case, and you went to bed.
I did not believe that she had cracked the case at the time. I went to bed.
I went to bed probably around 10 o'clock, and this is probably a sad commentary in my life, but my BlackBerry was on the pillow next to me.
And somewhere around 12:30, quarter to 1 in the morning, I received a phone call from one of my assistant special agents in charge, Jeff Sillette.
And my phone rang about a little after 1 in the morning.
I woke her out of a sound sleep, and I said, an MIT police officer has been murdered earlier this evening by individuals we believe to be responsible for the bombing, and they are on the streets of Watertown right now, engaged in a shootout with the Watertown Police Department.
It was combat. 2 suspects threw pipe bombs and a pressure cooker bomb at the police. An officer was gravely wounded. Those who argued that releasing the pictures would cause the suspects to run were right.
Was putting the pictures out the right call?
Yes, I think at the end of the day, we really had no choice Believe me, the death of Sean Collier is not lost on the FBI. We consider it an incredibly tragic event. But I think at the end of the day, given the facts as we knew them at the time, we made the best decision.
How do you feel about that decision now?
I stand by that decision, Scott. Nobody could have reasonably foreseen that a police officer would be murdered. What could reasonably be foreseen is that these individuals could have had more bombs, could have set those bombs off, and caused carnage similar or even greater to what they caused on April 15th.
One suspect was killed, the other vanished. In minutes, the FBI matched the dead man's fingerprints to Tamerlan Tsarnaev, an immigrant from Kyrgyzstan. Other records showed he had a brother.
Yeah, and I remember that so clearly. Somebody walking in with a manila folder and said, okay, here's his brother, and they opened it, and it's this picture, and I go, that's him, that's White Hat. That's who we should be looking for.
Friday, the governor ordered a lockdown of Boston, but a house-to-house search turned up nothing.
Everybody's exhausted and deflated. You know, I mean, it's a very sad day for Boston, another sad day for Boston.
But then, a man noticed someone in a boat in his backyard. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was wounded but alive.
What did you think as he went into court to be arraigned?
He had a smug grin on his face much of the time in the courtroom. He would glance over his right shoulder back to his relatives and smile and smirk at them. And I found that absolutely galling, and I found it reprehensible.
The Attorney General has decided to seek the death penalty in this case.
Yes, he has. And I support that decision.
Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has pled not guilty. His defense team declined to speak with us. U.S. Attorney Carmen Ortiz is preparing for a November trial.
8 days from now, 1 million people are expected to line the streets of Boston to watch 36,000 runners compete in the world's oldest and most prestigious marathon. The memory of the bombings near the finish line of last year's Boston Marathon is still fresh, and next week, the race promises to be unlike any other in its 117-year history, a chance for the city to come together and reclaim a beloved tradition that was torn apart by an act of terror. There hasn't been an American winner, male or female, of the Boston Marathon in almost 30 years. Kenyan and Ethiopian runners now dominate the sport. But this year, an American woman named Shalane Flanagan has a very real chance of winning the 26-mile race. She's only 5'4" and 102 pounds, but don't be fooled. She's been called a ponytailed assassin in knee socks. She also happens to have grown up in Boston, which makes her next week's hometown favorite.
Maybe it's just a Bostonian thing, but I was really genuinely just pissed off that someone would ruin what is such a celebratory day and a historical moment with that kind of action.
You were angry.
I was angry. I was really pissed off that that someone would do this. It's like it was a personal attack to my city.
Shalane Flanagan has been running in her city since she was a teenager. She grew up in Marblehead, a nearby suburb, and though she lives in Portland, Oregon now, she frequently returns to Boston to train along the marathon route.
It's my ultimate dream and goal to win the Boston Marathon. I am all in with this training. I have been out on the course training on it multiple times this fall, and I know almost every divot and bump in the road.
The Boston Marathon has been a part of Shalane Flanagan's life since she was a child. Both her parents were marathon runners. Her father ran 11 minutes off world record pace at the Boston Marathon in 1980. Her mother set a women's world marathon record in 1971.
I thought everyone's parents ran. I thought everyone got up and went to the, Sunday long run.
You thought everybody's parents did that?
Yeah, I thought it was like Church of Sunday long run. Everyone,
Church of Sunday long run.
That's what my dad would call it.
Long before she ever thought of running the Boston Marathon, Shalane used to stand near the finish line of the race to cheer her father on.
I watched from Hereford all the way down to the finish, and that's exactly the two areas where the bombs went off. So it was a surreal moment to think of. I was a little kid watching my dad run right there. I mean, that easily could have been me or my sister.
When the bombs exploded last year, 3 people were killed. 264 others were injured. The youngest victim was 8-year-old Martin Richard.
To see the young bodies lying there on Boylston Street, it's something that I'll never get out of my mind.
William Evans is the new Boston Police Commissioner. He's also a competitive runner. Last year's marathon was the 18th he'd run in Boston.
To have just come down that street an hour earlier with such excitement, such joy, and then to return again, I just didn't believe that could happen on Boylston Street in the city of Boston.
Commissioner Evans wanted to run again this year, but decided he should stay in the command post to oversee security.
You're going to see 36,000 people on that course with the same principle. Let's prove that we won't be intimidated by what happened back in April.
The race this year for a great many people will be about that. It will be seen as a response to terror, as a statement of resilience.
Tom Grillick is the executive director of the Boston Athletic Association, which has organized the marathon throughout its long history.
The event will go forward as what it has always been, both an athletic competition focused on excellence and a celebration around here of a great event in our community.
This year, he believes more spectators than ever will be on the streets cheering on the runners.
They want to take part.
They want to take part. If you're out there as a spectator and somebody comes along and their T-shirt says Carly on it, 1,000 people along the way will say, "Go Carly!" and everybody will have a good time.
Carly will suddenly have thousands of new friends.
Carly will look wicked happy.
Most runners in next week's marathon will just be happy to finish or reach a personal best. But for Shalane Flanagan and the other top runners, the goal is winning. And the race is as much about strategy and psychology as it is physical conditioning.
Obviously, marathons are painful, but for you, it's about being able to deal with pain yourself and also inflict pain on others.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of strategy.
Yes. You know, when I start to feel fairly uncomfortable, it's all about embracing it and realizing it's inevitable.
Embracing
it, yes. So if I'm uncomfortable, I usually know my competitors are uncomfortable. If they're straggling behind, that's kind of the time when I say, I'm going to put the screw in. I can tell that they're either struggling mentally or physically. So I'm going to just push it and just see if I can break them.
This is going to sound like an odd question, but do you like inflicting pain on your opponents?
I think everyone who's got a competitive bone in their body, to a certain degree, enjoy seeing a little bit some of the having their competition fall apart.
When Shalane started running in high school, there wasn't much strategy to her racing.
I would run so hard that I would literally make myself collapse.
I've heard you refer to it as kamikaze racing.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Kamikazes don't end up very well.
I know, but sometimes it could be brilliant.
Shalane was a champion cross-country runner in college and won a bronze medal in the 10,000-meter race at the Beijing Olympics. But to compete in the marathon, she needed to learn a whole new way to run. In 2009, at the age of 28, Shalane moved to Portland, Oregon, and began working with coach Jerry Schumacher.
So we're going to 2 loops, which is a little over 24 miles. And I'm prepping her to learn how to run 26 miles without blowing yourself up.
Which she had never done before.
Which, yeah, because she likes to go out and she likes to suffer. And in a marathon, if you're suffering at mile 3, you're probably not going to finish. All right, good.
Running is Shalane's full-time job. She's sponsored by Nike, which allows her to focus solely on training for the Boston Marathon. She often runs twice a day, up to 120 miles a week. In addition to lifting weights, she has to rigorously monitor everything she eats. Food is fuel, but she doesn't want to gain any extra weight she'll have to carry in the marathon. Watching Shalane and other top marathoners compete, it's easy to forget just how fast and how far they're running. Last year's female winner of the Boston Marathon, Kenyan Rita Jeptu, closed her final mile at a pace of 4 minutes and 50 seconds.
To finish a marathon running at 4 minutes and 50 seconds per mile, that's incredible.
It's incredible. After 25 miles of running, you have to be ready, even if it takes just that last mile, you know, to do whatever, you got to do whatever it takes to get into that finish line.
Yeah. To get a sense of just how fast Shalane runs during a marathon, we decided to try to keep up with her on a racetrack at Nike headquarters where she trains.
This is like a real race.
This is a real race. Shalane would run a quarter mile at her marathon race pace, and I would run as fast as I could, trying to stay with her. So you're going to go for your marathon pace?
Yes.
And I'm
We'll
going to...
see if you like that pace or not.
Jerry started us off.
Ready, set, go!
I jumped out front at first, but within a few seconds, Shalane, with her even pace and easy flowing stride, blew right past me, laughing all the way. She completed the quarter mile in about 79 seconds.
Almost there!
Oh my God.
Keep in mind that to complete a marathon, you'd have to run that distance 104 more times.
Did you feel me suffering out there?
Oh, yeah.
Because
Do you hear those giggles? That was pure joy.
You were giggling, yes.
Shalane's first marathon was in 2010 in New York City. Remarkably, she came in second behind Kenyan Edna Kiplagat.
And it's Shalane Flanagan,
completing the 26.2 miles in 2 hours and 28 minutes. It was the best finish by an American woman in New York in 20 years.
What did that tell you?
She can run the 26 miles, she can do the training for it, and in the right kind of race, she's going to be definitely dangerous.
Last year, Shalane ran the Boston Marathon for the first time. Early in the race, she and the other top women were running 6-minute miles, a relatively slow pace. When Kenya's Rita Jeptu finally picked up the pace in the last few miles, Shalane's legs couldn't keep up.
Boston has this really fun way of trashing your quads. As much as you tell your legs to respond and to pop off the ground, and like as much as you want it spiritually and mentally, if your legs don't have it, they don't have it. You can't, there's nothing you can do. Like I try to talk to them, I'm like, legs, you have to keep moving, you have to turn over, you need to be coming and giving me more energy, but if it's not there, it's not there. It's not much you can do.
You're actually talking to your legs.
Oh yeah, I have talks with them. Yeah, I'll look at my quads, I'm like, come on, you can do this. And so, I mean, no one sees that.
Do they respond?
No, they're usually like, hey, screw you. You know, we've been running for a long time.
Shalane finished fourth, and after the bombings, was the first runner to sign up again to compete this year. For the past 12 months, she's been focused on this one race, memorizing the marathon route in Boston, running long distances in Portland, and running at high altitude in the mountains of Arizona. All of it, every mile, dedicated to returning to Boston in peak form and winning the marathon.
To you, winning the Boston Marathon would be bigger than winning an Olympic medal?
Yeah, you could say, here, Shalane, you have an Olympic medal, or you could win the Boston Marathon. A no-brainer to me would be winning the Boston Marathon.
Why?
It is personal. It's where my inspiration started. It's where I fell in love with running.
What would it mean if a local person, someone from Boston, won the women's race?
It would be super. It would. It would just signify how resilient this community is and how hard someone would train to make sure this was special for everyone. So we'll go crazy.
The people who line the road certainly know any local runner who is there, so they will all know Shalane.
Do you think there are going to be a lot of people on the sidelines cheering for Shalane?
I think there will be a great many people on the sidelines cheering for
Shalane.
Go Shalane, go Marblehead.
She'll need all the support she can get. Last year's winner, Rita Jeptu, will also be running again next week.
Is Rita Jeptu beatable?
I believe so. Anyone is beatable. You know, Rita Jeptu is a phenomenal athlete, and I really admire her, but I know that on any given day I can beat her.
Beating Rita Jeptu and her other opponents may come down to personal motivation, Shalane's anger and heartbreak over what happened in Boston last year.
It's probably not a day that goes by that I don't think about the events that unfolded there.
Did that add to your desire to run this year?
Absolutely. After what happened with the bombs and everything that unfolded, it just gave more meaning and more incentive to pour everything I have into winning it.
A few months ago, we accompanied Shalane on one of her final practice runs along the Boston Marathon course. Despite all her rigorous training, her constant study of the physiology and psychology of running, when it comes to the Boston Marathon, Shalane Flanagan isn't immune to a little superstition.
I don't cross it.
As many times as you practiced in Boston leading up to this race, as many times as you've run on the actual course, you have yet to actually cross the finish line.
I've only crossed the finish line once.
Last year?
Last year.
During the race?
Yes, and I haven't done it in practice, no. So I'll save that for the day, for the real race.